The hunters gathered around for their meal, faces filled with laughter as conversation filled the space. Cabo the Great stood up, raising his glass, and immediately the room fell silent. Every eye turned to their leader. Cabo lifted his voice. "Our building efforts are progressing well thanks to the brothers and sisters before me." A loud cheer erupted from the room. "Our plans to cut off the food and water supply of the snake people are advancing as expected. Tomorrow, we will enter their territory, dig trenches, and divert the water from their river elsewhere. Titus will oversee the building efforts here at home, but I will personally lead the diversion of water and resources." A murmur of approval swept through the hall. "Tomorrow at dawn," he continued, "I will lead the team assigned to this task. For 1 week, we will ensure its completion, and we will return victorious." The hunters roared in agreement, their spirits high. Cabo let the energy settle before he raised his glass again. "There is also good news," he said, his gaze locking onto Naomi. "Naomi, join me." A hush fell over the room. Naomi hesitated. They had not discussed this, had barely discussed anything at all. Still, with measured steps, she made her way to his side. "At the next full moon, we shall have the first wedding among hunters. It is time we build legacies and secure our future." He paused, his voice firm. "Naomi and I will join in matrimony." The room erupted in cheers. Cabo took Naomi's hand and raised it high, their union now sealed in the eyes of the people. Then, his expression turned serious once more. "I encourage all hunters and huntresses to come together in matrimony, to build families grounded in the values we have been ordained by the goddess herself to protect." He glanced at Naomi, and for the first time she met his gaze. He expected resistance, hesitance, but what he saw instead was confidence and grace. She was really made to stand by his side. You are watching the Tales of the Savannah. Subscribe and be part of the tribe. Now let's get back to the story. The night continued in celebration, wine flowing, spirits high. Naomi, however, excused herself early, claiming exhaustion. Cabo watched her go, debating whether he should follow her. Titus slid into the empty seat beside him, grinning. "Maybe I should get myself a wife too," he said. Cabo smiled, though it didn't touch his eyes. "Yes, and I encourage it." His smile faded. "But I have a small problem, my friend." Titus frowned. "What is it?" Cabo's jaw tensed. "I need a woman tonight." Titus's smile vanished. "You just announced your wedding." "I know," Cabo said through clenched teeth. "But I can't think straight. I'm tense. I need release, Titus. If I don't get it, my mind won't be clear for the mission." Titus looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Cabo, this is a mistake. You know it." "I'm not asking." Cabo's voice was low, dangerous. "It's an order." Titus sighed, rubbing his face. "Give me 20 minutes." As his second-in-command disappeared into the night, Cabo leaned back, closing his eyes. It had to be done. If he wanted to lead with a clear head, this was the price. That night, Naomi lay awake in her room. Her heart was restless, her mind a storm she couldn't quiet. She didn't want this game anymore, the game of seduction. He had claimed her in front of everyone. Wasn't that proof enough? Before she could stop herself, her feet carried her to Cabo's door. She stood there, trembling, hands damp with nerves. Her first knock was soft. The second, a little braver. The third, bold. There was movement inside, a shuffle, footsteps, and then the door opened. Cabo stood there, his chest bare, his skin slick with sweat. "Naomi." His voice cracked with shock. She stared at him, and then her senses kicked in, her heart sinking, her stomach twisting. The scent hit her first, perfume. Another woman's scent clung to him, mixing with his own musk. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his body blocking the doorway. Naomi froze. Her breathing grew shallow, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I shouldn't have come." "No, wait." Cabo reached for her, but she stepped back. She looked him in the eye, and he saw it. Rage, disgust, heartbreak. I can explain, Naomi, Cabo pleaded. There's nothing to explain, she said quietly. I accept your terms, Cabo the Great. I knew the risks coming into this. Her voice was cold, dead. She turned to leave, her back straight, her pride her only shield. Cabo hated the way she looked at him now. He wanted to go back to before. He shouldn't care, it was a business agreement after all. But his heart was breaking. He couldn't let her go like that. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face him. Her gaze dropped, and there it was, the towel barely clinging to his hips, the evidence of what she had walked into. Please, Naomi, Cabo said, his voice raw. Let me explain, please. She took a step closer, her voice cutting through him like a knife. I will not allow my future husband to stand naked before his people like this. Her eyes burned into his. Do you understand me? He swallowed hard, the heat between them sparking even through the pain. It is beneath the leader of the hunters. Go inside. Finish whatever you started. Her voice softened just enough to cut deeper. I have a wedding to plan. She turned and walked away, her steps slow, her shoulders straight. Cabo stood frozen, torn between anger at himself and a craving for the only woman who ever truly made him weak. Two hunters on patrol stepped into the corridor, clearing their throats awkwardly. Sir, is everything all right? Cabo straightened, masking his shame with authority. Yes, I heard a sound. I was investigating. The hunters nodded and jogged off to check the perimeter. Cabo closed his eyes, inhaling sharply. He had wanted Naomi, had wanted her so much he'd gone looking for her ghost in another woman's arms. He wasn't even sure the girl's name. All he knew was that it was Naomi's name, he whispered when he touched her. He returned to his room. The woman was still there, sitting up, the sheet pulled over her chest. Is she gone? Yes, Cabo said softly, leaning against the wall. The girl smiled. So, should we finish what we started? Cabo shook his head. No, it was a mistake. Her smile faded. But, please, leave. His voice was low but final. She started to speak again, but he opened the door, wordlessly making her path clear. With a disappointed sigh, she gathered her things and slipped into the hallway. When the door closed behind her, Cabo stood in the silent room, staring at nothing. For the first time in his life, Cabo the Great, the warrior, the leader, the legend, felt like nothing more than a man who had lost the only battle that truly mattered. He wanted her, he needed her, but after tonight, he wasn't sure if he could ever have her heart. And that was the cruelest punishment of all. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, Cabo stood silently at Naomi's door. His shadow stretched long beneath the crack, and inside Naomi saw it. She lay in bed, her swollen eyes staring at the thin line of darkness that told her he was there. He didn't knock. He didn't call her name. He just stood there, his hand hovering over the door, caught between his pride and his guilt. He wanted to knock, to tell her goodbye, to promise that he would return in a week, to say the words that were burning his throat that he was sorry for last night, but instead he just stood there, staring at the door, wrestling with himself. After a long, aching moment, he turned and walked away. Inside the room, Naomi lay perfectly still. Tears she thought had run dry the night before threatened to come again. She had cried herself to sleep, her heart aching in a way she hadn't felt before. When she saw his shadow, smelled his scent through the wood, her heart leapt despite itself. Maybe, just maybe, he would knock. Maybe he would say something, anything. Maybe he would explain, maybe he would apologize. But the shadow disappeared, and with it, her last shred of hope. He was gone, and she would not run after him. She would not lower herself for any man, not even Cabo the Great. Is everything all right? Titus asked as the hunters prepared to leave. My plan last night backfired, Cabo muttered, his jaw tight. Titus gave him a long look, one eyebrow raised in silent judgment. Don't say it, Cabo warned. Yes, you were right, he exhaled sharply. I'll see you in a week. Make sure the building project stays on track. Send flowers to her room every day while I'm away. I really messed up, Titus. Without another word, Cabo led the hunters into the forest, his body moving with the confidence of a warrior, though his mind was anything but clear. The hunters moved swiftly, weaving through the dense forest until they reached the great river that fed into the heart of the Snake People's territory. The river was wide, its flow strong and steady, but they had a plan. They had to sever this lifeline. High on a hill overlooking the river, Gideon and Hannah stood at the edge of the Snake People's gates. They could see the hunters moving like ants, their intent as clear as day. This was no accident. It was sabotage. "They're cutting off the water," Hannah whispered, fear thick in her voice. Gideon's fists clenched at his sides. "They know exactly what they're doing." "If they succeed, we won't last long," she said. Gideon turned back toward the castle, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Then we must act. We cannot let them choke us dry." The war had begun, and both sides knew there would be no mercy. Seer was exhausted. He hadn't slept well in days, and his back ached from spending too much time crouched in the brush. He had been working overtime, diverting the hunters, making sure no one got close to Palesa's tracks. He had laid traps, confusing trails, and even a few decoys just to keep them off her scent. "One more night," he muttered to himself with a weary smile. "One more night, and they'll be safe. She'll be safe." From somewhere nearby, the sound of giggling broke through the morning silence. Malika's laugh, soft and infectious, echoed through the trees. Apparently, Tendai's jokes were getting better, or maybe Malika was just being polite. Either way, Seer couldn't decide if it was sweet or nauseating. Everyone knew when two hunters were falling for each other. It was absolute torture for the rest of the group. Endless inside jokes, stolen glances, and sweet nonsense whispered between patrols. And now, it was Tendai's turn to be insufferable. Seer, watching from a distance, was both amused and relieved. With Tendai distracted by Malika, it made Seer's job so much easier. Tendai was usually overzealous, always the first to spot tracks, always obsessed with getting the details right. But his focus was elsewhere, on her. And Seer was grateful. It gave him enough room to lay his bogus traps and steer the patrol in all the wrong directions. After all, Seer was still the senior tracker and his word was final, but his peaceful moment didn't last long. Tendai appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. "Father, I need to ask you something." Seer sighed, bracing himself. "Yes, Tendai." "Malika's been asking me questions I don't have answers to." Seer raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Tendai fidgeted, looking almost shy. "What's my mother's name?" Seer's stomach dropped. Of all the questions in the world, he had prepared for talks about hunting, survival, maybe even romance, but not this. Not Palesa. "Palesa," Seer said, the name slipping from his lips before he could stop himself. "Palesa," Tendai repeated slowly, tasting the word. "How come you've never told me this before?" Seer shrugged, trying to look casual but failing miserably. "And," Tendai's brow furrowed, "how did she pass away again?" Seer froze, his mind racing for a story. "She was kicked," he said quickly. "Kicked?" "By a horse," Seer added. Then, sensing doubt in his son's face, he backpedaled. "Or maybe a donkey." Tendai's eyes narrowed. "A horse? A donkey? Which one was it?" "Definitely a donkey," Seer said with fake confidence. Tendai stared at him. "And what exactly was she doing to earn a fatal donkey kick?" "It was really bad," Seer mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. Tendai crossed his arms. "Father, why do I get the feeling you're making this up as you go?" "I wouldn't lie to you," Seer said, smiling way too hard. "Then where is she buried?" Tendai pressed. "I'd like to visit her grave, pay my respects." Seer's mouth opened, then closed. "Well, you see..." "Let me guess," Tendai said, cutting him off. "An undisclosed location in a village that's long gone and conveniently erased from history?" Seer's face lit up. "Exactly. You're so smart, my son." Tendai shook his head, frustration flickering in his eyes. "You're so full of it, Father. You've been hiding her from me my whole life. Her name is Palesa, Seer said quickly. That part's true. So you admit everything else you have said is a lie? Seer winced. Only a little. Tendai's voice softened, pain creeping into his tone. Why, father? Why even lie at all? Before Seer could answer, Malaika's voice rang out from across the camp. Tendai, come here for a second. Tendai took a deep breath, shaking his head. This isn't over, father, he said, pointing at Seer before turning on his heel and running off to join Malaika. The village of the snake people lay in silence, the drum beats that had echoed through the night now nothing but a memory. The streets were empty, the villagers still curled in their beds, sleeping off the celebration and the heavy drink. It had been a night of joy, of bonding with the forest once more, but not for everyone. Inside one small hut, pain filled the air like smoke. Nandi lay trembling on her mat, her skin burning with fever. The snake inside her, held back for so long, was clawing to break free. It would no longer be silent. It wanted to suffocate her, just as the hunter within her had suffocated the snake all this time. Dialo sat beside her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He had not slept, wiping her sweat-drenched face and whispering soft comforts into the night. None of it worked. Her temperature was rising, her skin shimmering with scales that glinted in the faint light. In desperation, he had ground herbs into a paste and fed it to her, hoping anything might help. But she only vomited it back up, her body rejecting every attempt at relief. There was a knock at the door. Dialo froze, his breath caught in his chest. He crept to the window and peered out, his heart sinking when he saw Kwame standing outside. Shit, Dialo muttered under his breath. I know you're in there, Kwame's voice called, impatient. Open up. Dialo eased the door open just enough to slip outside, the morning air hitting his face like a slap. It was too soon for this. It's so early, Dialo said, voice tight. What do you want? We need to finish our conversation, Kwame said, his face as serious as ever. Kwame, I didn't sleep last night. Can we do this later? Please. Dialo's voice was almost pleading. Kwame studied Dialo's face, noting the exhaustion, the strain, the fear just beneath the surface. Something was wrong. Is everything okay? Kwame asked. Dialo hesitated. Kwame knew this camp better than anyone. He was the only link between the hunters and the snake people. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. Maybe Kwame knew a healer, someone who could keep this secret. But could Dialo trust him? Kwame's eyes softened, sensing Dialo's turmoil. I can help. Whatever it is, I can help. Dialo took a shaky breath. What I'm about to tell you could destroy us all, he whispered. What I'm about to show you will shock you, but I need you to stay calm. Kwame nodded, his curiosity tempered by the urgency in Dialo's voice. I might be making a mistake, Dialo said, but I can't lose my sister. Your secret is safe with me, Kwame promised. Dialo held Kwame's gaze a moment longer, searching for any sign of betrayal. Finding none, he opened the door. Kwame stepped inside and froze. Nandi lay curled on the mat, her face half covered in shimmering scales, her body shuddering with every breath. Kwame's breath caught. Nandi, he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. He'd seen this before. He'd felt it himself during his own transformation. But Nandi, the wife of Django, this changed everything. Dialo broke the silence. You said you could help. Kwame nodded, pulling his gaze away from Nandi. The snake people helped me when I first changed. They have healers. They guided me through the pain. But they can't know about her. No one can. Not even your queen, Dialo warned. I think an outsider can help. Kwame paused in thought. The Guardian. The Guardian? Dialo's voice sharpened. The one who came here yesterday? You know her? I escorted the queen to her once, Kwame said. She knows things no one else does. If anyone can help Nandi, it's her. The village is still asleep. It's been a long night, and they're all recovering. If we go now, we might make it without being seen. Any later, and the guards will be everywhere. Dialo turned to Nandi, her breathing shallow, her body weak. "Nandi, we have to go into the forest," he whispered. She groaned softly, barely able to respond. Dialo pulled a hood over her head, hiding her face. Kwame stepped forward, gently taking one of her arms. Dialo took the other. Together they lifted her, each step slow and careful. With every step into the forest, Dialo's heart pounded harder. He glanced at Kwame, seeing the same fear and hope reflected in his eyes. This was no longer about just saving Nandi. This was proof that the snake bloodline was not as rare as Kwame thought. There were others, but this was not the time for questions, not yet. For now, survival was all that mattered. And that, my dear tribe members, brings us to the end of yet another episode in our Snake People vs. Hunters series. In this episode, Cabo the Great announces a union between himself and Naomi, but he's got an itch he just has to scratch. Unfortunately for him, that itch turns into hives, backfiring in ways he never saw coming. Elsewhere, Cabo leads his team to disrupt the river, cutting off a vital resource and leaving the Snake People desperate for survival. Will the Snake People retaliate in ways the hunters never expected? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Meanwhile, Seer grapples with the questions every child eventually asks. What's my mother's name? How did she die? And where is she buried? Whether Seer can't tell Tendai the truth or simply won't is a debt that time itself will one day demand payment for. And lastly, Nandi is in the throes of a slow, agonizing transformation. Her brother Dialo never leaves her side, and now Kwame has discovered a secret buried deep within the Snake People's ranks. The Guardian may hold the key to saving her, but there's much more to this story, and trust me, tribe, there's a lot to talk about. Until then, stay wild, stay curious, and stay ready for what's to come. Want to support the channel and become an even bigger part of our tribe? You can join for as little as the cost of a coffee each month. Your support helps me continue creating the content you love, but of course, just having you here is already more than enough. Thank you for being part of this journey. A warm and heartfelt thank you to all the amazing tribe members who have chosen to join and support this incredible journey. Your belief in this channel means the world to me, and I'm so glad to have you along for the ride. And as always, thank you for watching our story, and we hope you enjoyed it. What lessons did you draw from this story? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of the tribe. Thank you for watching The Tales of the Savannah. We will see you next time in the Savannah.